Welcome to our podcast series, Identity, Dialoguing with the Other and Myself. I'd like to welcome Dr. Dominique Charon to our podcast. Dominique has had an illustrious career in research and international development as a veterinarian and epidemiologist. And we are here to talk to her about her role as a leader, a woman leader in the area of STEM. Welcome, Dominique.
Nita, it's really a pleasure to have this conversation with you today, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. So I wanted to start with you and how, as this discussion is about identity, your identity as a leader has evolved over your career. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I started my career as a veterinarian, as a clinician, practicing in small animal clinics in Canada, and in that context, I was a young woman in a professional leadership position, and always, is essentially in charge. I found that very empowering and satisfying, and that's where I really began to feel the lived experience of leadership, in the sense that it was it's how my innate leadership skills began to manifest in a professional environment, and how I began to learn and see how my approach worked with the people around me. Following that, I went back to school. In graduate school, the opportunities for leadership are more informal, collaborative type of leadership in a scientific context with other graduate students and so forth. A number of opportunities arose in there, but what I would say, what am I trying to say? No, really. They're all important, but no particularly. None that really stand out for me. I had my turn being the leader of our Graduate Students Association in our department, kind of thing. So opportunities presented themselves, but not in any kind of formal context. Then, in a postdoctoral context, I led a research program around climate change and its impact on the risk of infectious diseases in Canada. And that's where my leadership as a scientist really began to come out, where creativity and innovative ideas are really important, and found that I was able to build quite a bit of momentum around my ideas and gather people together to support me in those ideas. And again, those forms of leadership were informal, in the sense that I was the lead on a grant application, but my collaborators did not report to me in an organizational sense. And through that work, which was in the context of a research program embedded at Health Canada, the Department of Health of Canada, expanded my scientific leadership. And then from that, made the jump to the international development sphere in an organization called the International Development Research Centre of Canada, where I led a team focused on ecosystem approaches to health and their application in a development context. And my career grew then through over the next 15 years, through various levels of more senior management, to the position I'm in now, which is as vice president, with the responsibility for all of our research programs. And that's where the formal dimensions of leadership evolved. The And so going from a clinical practitioner leader where I have decisions about care in the early days of my career, where that decision making is absolute and important for the life and health of the patient, to a context of scientific leadership, which is much more a great deal of creativity and vision involved, but also the ability to bring people around an idea and to then implement those types of skills. And then into a more formal organizational type of leadership where the management dimensions of leadership became very, very important as well. And how the tension between the creative and the implementation sort of systematic dimensions of leadership were, I would say, a constant feature in my journey.
Thank you. That's very interesting and salient. So I was also wondering, in your journey, what types of stereotypes have you encountered as a woman in a leadership position in STEM that have been positive or negative, and had an impact on your working abilities?
Yeah, I'd say I consider myself to be a feminist and a feminist leader. And although being a feminist has always been a part of my identity, the feminist leadership dimension became more and more important the more my level of leadership, of formal organizational leadership, progressed. I have to say, I think I've been quite fortunate in my leadership career in that, or in the evolution of my leadership career, in that my chosen field, which really, although it's based in veterinary sciences, my practice in research and then in leadership has been in public health, is a field that is, at least in Canada, filled with strong women role models at this point, and has been at many points throughout my career opportunities to connect with women leaders. And there's a great deal of, I would say, although there is discrimination, there is inequality, certainly, it hasn't been felt in the same way, I think, as women in this field, perhaps in other countries, have had to deal with it. That being said, I have had to deal as a woman in my career with microaggression, statements like, "Where's your smile?" Or by supervisors, situations in which I've been exposed to sexualized humor in the workplace, not directed at me, or about me, but sexualized humor in the workplace, and other forms of sexism in the workplace that have made it clear that even in public health, even in an enlightened scientific environment, there is still a great deal of work to do. The other thing that I would say is this idea of structural issues that women come across in their careers. One of the things I'm most proud of is my part in helping change policies in workplaces wherein women who took time off for maternity leave would be discriminated against when it came to promotion. And the realization for an organization that that is a structural form of discrimination, and that it's very easy to change, but it requires a change in mindset, right? The change in mindset, and I would say environments I have worked in have been gender blind, wherein women contributing to science, and women scientists, not contributing to, women scientists, women researchers are penalized for taking time off. And the reaction to the conversation about changing that is, yes, but they haven't put in the time compared to others, mainly men or other women who have not taken time off. And the shift in mindset that is required to say the taking of time off to have kids is something that women must do. Men cannot do it physically, and therefore the frameworks and policies that we have to allow for that without discriminating against them. And it should not be about the time put in, but about the work and the evidence that these women have contributed sufficiently to science to be able to progress without being penalized for that time. And it's still a struggle, I would say, for women everywhere in science to try and maintain the level of output required while also taking time to have kids. It's not resolved fully, and I would say in the scientific community writ large, there's still a problem in that women will publish less in their childbearing years unless they stay up all night and all day to continue their scientific careers and outputs. And the solution to this is a structural one that needs to value more than just scientific outputs as part of a scientist's contribution in their career, and to make it possible for women, but also for men, to take time to have to spend with their families at crucial moments in early childhood.
Well, that's very interesting. So, I mean, it's example of a concrete outcome in which you've influenced with regards to women and their contribution in the scientific field. I'm kind of interested in this question, but I'm not exactly sure whether it's a question that is fair given today's discussions around gender. But do you believe there are qualities that women leaders have that may be different? For example, there are two prime ministers, Jacinta Ardern and the prime minister in Finland, who, you know, have been pointed out in the press of having particular qualities that are female. Jacinta Ardern, for example, they talk a lot about kindness and her perspective on the role of kindness as a leader. Do you feel that women have a different type of leadership quality in science, contribute even the research questions they asked or the way in which they conduct research or prioritize research? Do you think there are qualities that you can pinpoint?
It's a really good question, Nita, and I've thought about this a lot. In the context, I think there are two dimensions to this. One, leadership and decisions are better made with a diversity of views and perspectives. And the problem, I would say, with decision making in an organizational context in most of our institutions and organizations, businesses, is that they are still predominantly being made by people who have similar lived experience. White, middle-aged men with successful careers of various dimensions or positions in society. And That makes for a set of decisions that are biased by that very uniform compared to what it might be lived experience. The lived experience of those men is very similar. The reason we need more people with different lived experience in positions of leadership is to help bring that lived experience and those perspectives to decision making, policy making, to better reflect the whole of society and or the whole of an organization, but the whole of society and public institutions like mine, to have that decision making, strategy, and policy reflect the whole of society. And we don't have that, right? It's a continual struggle. I would say what we have in Canada, in public institutions in Canada, is a growing awareness that the status quo is a problem. And that's a huge win, right? For a culture of leadership to change at the level of an entire society, there needs to be in that process a recognition of the current culture of leadership, that it's not that the current status quo is not the best, and that changes need to be made to change that. So I would say in Canada, we're fortunate that there's a growing awareness in public sector, and I would say perhaps in some sectors of private sector as well, that a greater diversity of views is needed. And this is beyond the need for gender equality and greater representation of women, although that is, I would say, the first earliest realization that there aren't enough women in boardrooms, there aren't enough women in positions of senior leadership, and that needs to change. But having more women without a change in the culture and the perception that, yes, we need more women, but we're still going to make decisions the way we've always made them. We're still going to have an environment wherein people with power sit in a room, hash out their vision for a decision, and then implement that decision without bringing in a wider perspective of views outside of that decision-making room. Whether there's women in there or not is still a problematic patriarchal decision-making model. And for that patriarchal decision-making model to change, having women in the room helps, but isn't enough. The culture of decision-making needs to take on the sense that a diversity of perspectives is essential for the best decisions, and to develop and implement ways of bringing a variety of views to the decision-making process in a meaningful way and in an efficient way that will make it such that the decisions that are made in that room are informed by a wide variety of views. And then absolutely over time bring in and help build up those different perspectives that will be more valued and therefore have more chances at leadership. And by that, I mean, just as women struggle to achieve positions of leadership and to be effective, not to achieve positions of leadership and to be supported in positions of leadership, other marginalized voices, groups, people of visible minorities, we would call in Canada, or racialized groups, people with non-binary gender identities feel that they do not have the same access to power, and that those problems are profound and really I would say a societal project to change. The boardrooms will change as society also changes. And it's I would say, a whole of society project to bring about the change. Public institutions are in a position of leadership and can put in place policies that make it clear that this is in society's interest to make these changes in positions of leadership. But the whole of society then has to support the talent pool to be able to fill those positions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. I am, though, wondering if you think there are particular qualities that women have.
Of women. So there are differences. And I would say because women's lived experience is different than men's, and the lived experience of different women is different from one from another. The qualities that we bring reflect that different lived experience. Women will, at least in my experience, tend to consider first, or alongside other factors, the impact of decisions on people. And that, that's one way in which decision-making is improved when there are more women in the room. But I go back to what I said before, the women in the room need to have the opportunity to bring that perspective to the table. If the decision-making culture is such that the impact of decisions on people is not valued or important, then women who bring that perspective will not necessarily be heard or be successful. And if we go back maybe a decade, or perhaps it's still very prevalent now, women in boardrooms will have a decision-making style that is not much different than their male peers.
So you think that the culture is still so patriarchal that women can't express themselves in a way, or doesn't allow them to break out of a box, that they have to play the game, well, so to speak?
Absolutely. The system that builds leaders and puts people in position of executive power values some types of skills and attributes more than others, whether they're coming from a man or a woman or a non-binary person. And so while changing that culture is more likely to happen when there are more people in the room challenging that culture, that the challenge to that culture may come from women. It may also come from men and others in the room who say the impact of this decision on people is important. And yes, more women in the room will help strengthen the value of that perspective. And it's but I try to, in my own journey of being much more aware of bias and my own sort of inherent biases, my unconscious bias, is not assume that a person will make a certain will bring a certain perspective because of their gender.
Yeah, okay. So actually that brings me to another question, which is, how do you see yourself as a role model for young women in STEM, going into STEM, into leadership positions?
Yeah. So if I go now, I've been working in the field of public health and international development in public institutions in Canada, in a public institution in Canada now for most of my career. And as I said at the beginning, I've been very fortunate to be in a quite enabling environment, not without problems, as I don't want to put forward Canada as a, you may want to edit that out. It's my dishwasher making noise in the background. To as a Canada has, in my experience, has begun to really strengthen the perspective of gender and inclusion in its model of policy, of leadership, and has made great strides in the past decade, but still a long way to go. And it's no secret, I would say, that our relationship with Indigenous peoples of Canada, for example, is not at all representative of equality, of inclusion. And there's a great deal of work to do there, including in public institutions. So, but if I go back to so that's been my experience. But I started out in veterinary science, which was in my formative years shifting from a male-dominated field to, particularly in clinical small animal practice, pets and companion animals, more female-dominated, but still quite the faculty and the power structures in that profession very male dominated. That was quite an important moment in my life to realize that while there were no formal barriers to me becoming a veterinarian and to succeeding, there would be significant barriers to me developing or achieving levels of leadership, for example, as a faculty member, as a practice owner, or in the governance of the profession. Now that has changed over the past 25 years, but when I was emerging as a newly minted veterinarian, I began to see these imbalances. And that then, as I pursued my doctoral studies in my PhD, I also then, it became very important to me to push for greater inclusion of women, greater support for women students, particularly women graduate students who were also having children. I had a baby during my graduate studies. There were no maternal benefits at that time. I went back to studies and to my teaching roles when my baby was 6 weeks old. You know, that's changed. But when I was a student, it was still, there were no supports for women graduate students. So that was formative. When I think of and so now the opportunity such as this to talk about how women, how I and other women have brought attention to these problems and helped change them, creates an opportunity for women who are moving into a scientific field to see that things can change, to see their opportunity to contribute to that change, and to see pathways for them to thrive despite barriers that are still present.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So as a scientist and a female scientist, your lived experience, as you mentioned, as a young mother, in graduate studies, as a female veterinarian, you modeled how you moved through that process for other young women to follow.
Yeah. And, even in my own career, people looking at my career see a certain trajectory, but there have been many times where I have found I've had to make tough choices. Do I, by taking on a career in international development that would have me travel extensively and be away from my son as a single mother, was a tough choice. And I was enabled to make that choice because I had a very supportive extended family close by.
Mm-hmm.
And but other women have made similar choices. Other women in similar circumstances have pursued careers in international development, including living overseas, where supports are more affordable, shall we say, and can be people can surround themselves with the support they need. Women can surround themselves with the support they need, but they're tough choices. These are tough choices. That's very déchirant to leave your kid behind with a babysitter, even if that babysitter is your mother, right, a grandmother. So it's and disappear for 3 weeks, and those kinds of decisions don't necessarily have the wide societal support that they would need to have for women to feel more comfortable making those decisions to pursue at the same time science and their careers, whether it's in international context or women who need to be in the lab overnight to pursue research. And those kinds of choices, I certainly felt that I was making them on my own, and that the constant tension between decisions for my career versus the need to be a good mother. And society has a long way to go, I think, before we can really support women to thrive. Culturally, as I said before, particularly in STEM fields, there's a long way to go. The perception is that, sure, women are welcome, but if they take time off to have babies, they will be penalized because their scientific output will be less. Sure, women are welcome, but they need to be available to finish the experiments and have come up with another solution for picking up the kids from daycare. And these kinds of challenges wind up in my experience, and there's been research on this as well, by a number of researchers now examining women's scientific trajectories. Why is it that women exit their scientific careers before they're at the level where they can move into positions of senior leadership? Why is it that fewer women than men complete their PhDs? Fewer women than men complete their postdocs and exit scientific careers at an early stage in their careers because they are unable to resolve the tensions between their family goals and their careers. These types of challenges mean that when we get to those senior leadership positions, deans, heads of research councils, senior faculty, senior scientific advisors, to government, senior scientific positions in private sector, they're not women. There are fewer women than men competing for those positions. So that kind of cohort, how to keep and preserve and strengthen the cohort of women and other groups who are underrepresented in the senior ranks, how to encourage, how to support so that they stay in science and succeed in science is a major challenge for the STEM community. And this is the case in Canada. It's the case in most high-income countries, and it's even more so the case in low and middle-income countries, where women face enormous societal hurdles, much greater discrimination and judgment against them for favoring career over family, and far fewer societal, governmental, public supports and safety nets to enable them to do it. So the challenge then is that the ideas that inform science, the perspectives that inform science, that all of that creative and innovative capacity that is present on this planet, only a segment of it is contributing to the new ideas that we need to solve the biggest problems we're facing: climate change, of poverty, of conflict, without a broad cross society, whole of the world perspective in research, including in STEM fields. We are hamstringing our ability to solve the global challenges.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm hearing from you is this judgment. There's this great judgment of women pursuing STEM. And what I've also heard is this balance between the identity as a mother and the identity as a leader and as a scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And this struggle of these different descriptors of who your identity is and other women out there, this struggle and the trade-offs between these different descriptors of identity. And I wondered if there's an example, and you have given a few examples of a scenario where you as a woman, you as a mother, you as a scientist has prevented access to power or resources. And what are some of the techniques you use to problem solve around this? So giving some people some solutions around problem solving, around balancing these.
It's a really good question, Nita. I think being clear about what I wanted, being clear with myself about what I wanted at particular moments in my life has been, I think, in retrospect, had I invested more at various points in clarifying for myself what I wanted and then pursue that and put in place what I would need to achieve what it is that I wanted, would be, I would say, a useful sort of tool or approach to help other women building their careers. We tend, I think, to default to roles and identities that others define for us. And as you noted, the whole of society's expectations of a new or young mother is that we will invest most of our time and energy into the child rather than framing it in such a way that a young mother who is also a scientist or has a particular career objective needs to be supported to do both, and that it is important for the child to be supported and invested in, but that it is not the sole or only the sole responsibility of the mother to do that, and that it is there are perfectly, in fact, desirable and acceptable, more than acceptable, desirable ways to achieve that investment in the child that is not solely dependent on the mother. This puts an unreasonable burden on a woman. And we know from all of the research that there is on women's mental health, new mothers' mental health, the science and understanding of postpartum depression. And at no time, I would say, in our ancient history, has a woman ever been expected to be solely responsible for the baby. It's a societal project, right? It takes a village, and it has always taken a village to raise a child or children. So that idea, this idea of somehow of the superwoman, and this is a modern idea, the nuclear family, the woman as a tremendous successful mother, tremendous successful in her career, and beautiful and loving and doting, a successful partner to her husband. It's an strange and odd recent idea, and it's not helpful for women in STEM. So pushing against that idea, not succumbing to trying to do it all, and being clear at various moments about what's more important. And that can change from week to week. This week, it might be, I need to write this paper. I need to complete my promotion and tenure package. I need to complete this experiment in the lab. I'm going to be in there 20 hours a day for the next 2 weeks. And then at another point, it might be, my child is struggling at school. I need to invest more time in supporting my child, bringing the right supports around so that my child can succeed with this particular hurdle, whatever it might be. Or my child has a birthday and I want to invest in this birthday party for my child. And those choices do not, sometimes they'll be in conflict, and then there's tough choices, but it's being clear about what's more important at a various moment. That, I think, if we were to empower one another to focus in on what's more important this week or this month or this year, would be very enabling for women to navigate those different dimensions of their identity, and to feel supported to invest in the career and the science at the moments when it's important for them to do it. The other thing that I think is very important, and you've touched on it a few times, the mentorship. It's very comfortable for me to sit here and talk about my life and the choices I made. When I was in it, it was extremely difficult at times to make to take the risk, to make a choice that felt hard, to push myself forward, to pursue a promotion, for example, when the internal talk in my head would be, "Ooh, are you ready for this? Do you feel like you can invest the time in it? Do you feel as though you have the right supports around you to do it?" And I think having more mentors to draw on in those moments of doubt, of self-doubt, crucial to helping women move forward. We all have doubts all the time, right? Men and women. Women talk about it more, maybe. Men have them too. But where I've found, and my mentors have not all been women by any means. And in fact, most of my mentors in my early career were men. But as I've moved forward in the latest part of my career, I've found really, really important to have access to women role models, women mentors who can challenge my self-doubt, and in a way that feels safe, and help me overcome any sort of internal mental barriers I've built for myself.
Very interesting. So you talk about mentorship, you talk about your role as a mother, as a scientist, you talk about support, the importance of support networks, and maybe the role of an institution creating support, but also socially and through family, how support you and others to go through that process of creating that multiple complex identity that isn't just a scientist, that isn't just a woman, that is a mother. And so that brings me to a question about we did in the workshop around there's you in the middle, and around there's some circular satellites of descriptors of who Dr. Dominique Charon is. I wondered if you could just give us some of those descriptors.
Yeah. Well, the one that we haven't talked about, I'll come to third, but clearly for me, my identity, the descriptors that arise from my sense of self, of me are of a feminist, a scientist, person who enjoys bringing people together to work together towards a common goal. So that's the leadership dimension, the collaborative leadership dimension. There's a lot to do in the world. There's a lot to do in a life. And I have always considered myself a person who brings people together to do things. And then the parts of my identity that are important, that are defined in relation to others, certainly mother. I'm the daughter of an aging mother, and so a lot of my sense of self in recent years has been in relation to how I can support her to remain independent, and as a friend, and a woman who has in relation to this network of people who are important to me. Those are all important dimensions that have different weight at different moments, and certainly my son now, who's an adult, and it's a different kind of relationship now than it was when he was a child. And likewise, my relationship with my mother is a different one, and is defined very much by what she needs now, and how important it is for me, for her to feel empowered to remain independent. The one that I think if I go back to the three sort of dimensions of my own arising from me, the feminist we talked about, I feel I continue to live that in different ways. I feel I haven't always lived it as much as I might have, but it has only become a stronger dimension of my identity throughout my life. And not only in relation to work, but in relation to how I show up as a mother, how I support my own mother's independence, how I support my friends. The scientist informs my worldview. I look for evidence. I look for data to support my positions on things, and I struggle in an environment where people do not do that. So it means I must be constantly reminding myself, when I am outside of a scientific empirical worldview, which is very dominant, I would say, in Western society, but is not the same everywhere, that not everyone views the world that way. And that the fact that people don't necessarily view the world through an empirical scientific lens does not mean that their truth is less valid than mine. And that is constant. It's not a constant in the sense that I operate in a organizational and societal framework that for the most part shares that view. But when I interact with people in the field, the communities that the science that my organization supports is meant to help, I need to remind myself that it is not everyone's worldview, and that how I communicate and how I listen needs to be informed by some sort of self-check. The last one, which is the leadership dimension, I would say is the one that I've struggled with at various points in my life. And that's partly because as a creative thinker, and as someone who's very open to different perspectives, it has not always been easy to manifest my leadership in a very patriarchal environment. And I would say all of my mentors at key points in my career were from that patriarchal, the dominant, I know it's patriarchal, but it's the dominant view. And it's hard to bring forward different ways of doing things when the dominant view or the dominant culture of leadership is not collaborative, is not as open to different processes for decision making. And that, I would say, I feel that I have made a contribution, but where there's so much more growth that I can have personally in this journey, and where the opportunity or the need for more diverse leadership perspectives in society is needed, so that people like me who want to do things differently have more access to environments and cultures where that's possible, decision-making cultures.
Right. Well, thank you. That was very holistic and very comprehensive description of your identity descriptors. And I really want to thank you for taking the time with us. It was fascinating as usual. And I look forward to continuing to discuss this project that we're working on together. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Really a pleasure, Nita. Thank you so much for the conversation. It's been a pleasure.